Everyone hear me? Great. So as Jerry mentioned, I'm currently at Kleiner Perkins. It's a VC firm in Silicon Valley, and we invest in a lot of probably your companies out there. But within KP, I focus on all of our executive recruiting at the VP level and C level. Before that, I was in the CIA, totally unrelated to what I do now. I'll just skip past that. And then before that, I was at Riviera Partners, and I was one of the first recruiters over there. Helped recruit for a lot of the early companies here in Silicon Valley. Companies that were very early on, like Palantir and Zing at the time. So I estimate in the last 10 years, I probably interviewed close to 9,000 to 10,000 people. And it's just my day in and day out. So today, really, we're going to focus on the interview itself. In regards to the entire interview flow, you have the preparation, the icebreaker agenda, the wrap-up. I'm really going to talk about the interview, and in particular, open-ended questions itself. So I just want to start out by dispelling a myth in regards to, is there such thing as a perfect candidate, right? Is there that one engineer or is that one VP that will be a perfect fit at every company? And in celebration of the fact that Avengers is coming out this Friday, there's a character called the Celestials, or group of characters, right? And their skills are so outrageous that it's just off the charts, right? They're like super fast and super intelligent. It's like empathetic engineer that's really technical, that knows when to say something. It's just like it doesn't exist, right? And the concept that I use to discuss it is there's a lid for every jar, right? There's a good candidate for you in the company, and that may be a horrible fit for another company, right? And so the point of that is trying to understand what kind of framework that you need to evaluate to find the candidate for you. And in particular, what are the skills that you're trying to look for and optimize for? And so for me, there are three that I use, and this is really applicable for technical individuals, engineering managers and leads, and then directors and VPs. I happen to spend a lot of my time at the directors and VP level, but this is my framework: technical acumen, people acumen, or people management, and then business acumen. It's fairly simple. I like it that way. Software engineers, technical acumen. Engineering managers, it's a combination of technical and people, and kind of the weighting of the two itself. Directors and VPs, a mixture of the three. I truly don't believe that you can, as a VP and a director, be good at all three. There are very few people that can do that. Maybe John and Eddie, quite frankly. But it's important to know kind of what you're looking for and what you're optimizing for. And on a software engineer, it's a little bit more linear in that sense. But as you get more senior in your career, you're going to start optimizing and spiking on certain areas. And within the company, you need to know what's most important for you at the company and what you're looking for. And so now that you know exactly what it is, I'm going to take a little departure. You start asking questions, right? I do want to pause for a second in the sense that, unless you want to make your candidate super nervous, please ease into the interview. I see this with a lot of first-time engineering managers as they're starting to interview candidates. Is you get into the meeting and you start peppering questions itself. Ask them how their day is. Ask them where they grew up. Ask them to walk through their resume very quickly. That's just important because I see that mistake so often with first-time managers. After you get past that, the second thing I see is the prioritization of the questions is really important. So now that you have the framework itself, you got to start with the most important thing, right? If for me, let's just say, for example, I'm helping interview a VP of engineering for a healthcare company, and they have a really good bench of healthcare experts within the company. So the business acumen, they have that down pat, and they really need, let's say, people management because they're scaling massively over the next 2 years, right? And they necessarily don't need a technical person. Why go into a meeting asking about healthcare, and why go into a meeting asking about technical when the first thing that you should kind of rule out is people management? So really focusing on that is the most important thing. And if they can't get through that in an elegant way, then you move to your last question, which is, do you have any questions for me, right? And just kind of move on. But this I do see quite a bit, which is kind of going through and not prioritizing the questions that are important. So once you have prioritized the questions itself, this is where the meat of it comes into play, and this is where I think a lot of people who are interviewing ask what I call closing questions, like how many people have you managed, what were the revenues at the company, have you done a PIP before, right? Those are very linear questions itself. And so open-ended questions are an example for people management. Tell me about your best hire and why were they amazing, and where is that individual today? You really get into the psychology of like, what an engineering manager does, and that's like it's a management of people itself. If they can't recall who some of their best hires were, like right off the bat, and tell you maybe some of their life stories and like their hobbies itself, like it makes you wonder what kind of manager they are, right? What was the team like when you joined, and what changes did you make? Like it tells you a little bit about the manner how they went about, changing out the team or maybe adding to the team itself. How would you describe your management style and philosophy? It's a very broad question itself, but you can kind of see where things go. Maybe some people will say like, hey, I'm actually a micromanager, and this is the way I like to do it. How did you go about PIPs? How did you choose the approach? Was it the right approach itself? So these are some examples of it. Business questions. How would you describe the market conditions and competitive landscape? Like very broad itself, but if they can really describe all the kind of factors within the business itself, if it's healthcare or clean tech or consumer software, then it tells you that they were really involved in that, in the level of seniority. What were the metrics for success? Main revenue drivers, and how engineering tied into it itself. And the relationship. This is a really important one. Engineering leaders that have a strong relationship and working relationship with all the various departments like sales and marketing and design, outside of product, which is fairly given, I think it shows a broad gauge executive as well too. And so the reason why we ask open-ended questions is not necessarily just to get to quality answers, but it also communicates a lot during the interview itself. If you think back and look back at your time, you can probably remember an interview where you're like, what, that person asked really good questions, right? And that probably reflected well on the company itself. And so I really take that to heart. Is like I spend a lot of time in the interviews. I might as well make it a really productive exercise itself. And so after you've asked all these questions, these are just some kind of general thoughts that I've had. Over time, I think you'll start to understand the nuances in regards to observers versus doers. People who have a humble attitude towards things versus people who don't. People who can dive deep down into subjects versus people who are very kind of shallow and surface level. Good versus great is very hard to assess itself. But over time, as your bar becomes better and better and you're interviewing more people, you'll understand like what truly great is. There are quite a few unconscious people out there. Like they just have no self-awareness of who they are, their kind of development areas itself. And so asking them, a good one is, walk me through your last review. What was it? I think someone mentioned it. I think Eddie mentioned it. I think there are small company people and there are big company people. And understanding that and kind of where you are in your company stage itself is really important. And then lastly, I have this concept of mavericks versus architects versus guardians. There are employees that are really good in the beginning of a project where they can help you brainstorm. They love to kind of build products itself, but they hate finishing them. There are individuals that kind of architect and see a system from end to end. And then lastly, guardians are the ones that kind of take over after everything's built, and they kind of keep it all together. And I generally find that there are three people that fit into that category itself. The last thought I want to bring to you kind of pops up a bit more, and it kind of ties into values, but more so it's a framework of how I think about entrepreneurs, how I think about employees, how I think about companies. It's a framework that my partners and I at Kleiner Perkins shares, and the differences between a mercenary versus missionary. And it's very subtle, but I think the difference between a mercenary and missionary is mercenaries are driven by paranoia and versus passion. Mercenary entrepreneurs and mercenary companies are all about the pitch and the deal. They're very optimistic and they think in the very short term, whereas missionary entrepreneurs know that they're doing something very big. And it's all about the partnership. It's about the long-term run that you have to do, right? Mercenaries obsess on competition, right? They're all about the idea of the founder itself and idolizing that and using that as leverage to build products versus missionaries talk about the best idea and use that as a way to push products forward, and they obsess on customers, right? Mercenaries are led by financial statements versus values, and you find that mercenaries are typically very alone. They want to be in their little project and silo and be the success of that itself, as opposed to coaching others and leading people, and the differences between entitlement versus contribution itself. So I think the reason I bring this up is because in Silicon Valley, especially in this time and day and age, there's a lot of access to money, and everyone has a choice pretty much where they want to go, and there's a lot of, I think there's a rise in mercenaries, or what I call tourists, people here for the fame, the money, the success itself, so as opposed to chasing meaning and value and significance. And so when you interview someone, my hope is that you take into account that in a sense of like, what do you represent, and what does that person represent as well too, and hopefully I'll have alignment in values. For my partners and I at KP, obviously we believe that the missionary entrepreneurs and missionary companies are the ones that succeed and do well and end up changing the world. But it can work both ways. So I'll leave with that. And I know some people are taking notes. And we covered a lot in regards to questions. If you send me 3 questions, technical, people, business questions, I'll compile that and then share it to every single person that emails me. And so we'll have a nice little bank of questions itself that you can ask, and keep them open-ended. Remember that there's a lid for every jar. Everyone's unique itself. So making sure to tailor the questions is important. And I'll be around if anyone has any questions. So thank you.